Well, good evening or good afternoon, everybody. I am Paul Melmeyer. I'm the Vice President of Public Policy and Advocacy at the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and I'll be your host and moderator for this evening. We're very excited to welcome you to our March MDA Advocacy Institute. And this time we're going to be covering a really exciting proposed rule that was released by the Department of Transportation just a handful of weeks ago. That is actually specifically targeting the experiences of wheelchair users when flying and trying to tackle those unsafe and oftentimes undignified experiences the community can have. So that is the focus of today. We're going to be walking you through the proposed rule, as well as ways for you to get involved from there. So I do believe we are going to be recording this evening, of course. Before we get to a few housekeeping items and introductions, this again is just what we're going to be covering for this evening. We're going to be talking about what the department is trying to accomplish with this proposal. From there, we're just going to kind of give you a little bit of a background of what this proposal is versus what we've been talking about in other contexts, which is what's happening on Capitol Hill to make air travel more accessible. We're going to be diving straight into the proposed rule itself. We're going to get pretty wonky tonight, if you will. We're going to look at some of the specific proposals the department is putting forward and what impact they could have on those with disabilities. And then finally, what's next and how you can get involved, for that matter, in ensuring that really kind of the best rule possible is finalized. I'm really excited to be joined by a number of really fantastic colleagues. And before I introduce them, just a couple housekeeping notes. For one, for those of you who would like to use closed captioning, you can go to the bottom left of your screen. The bottom left of your screen, there's that little CC you can see in the image on the left of the screen here. Just click that, and that should be able to activate closed captioning for you. We also encourage you to be participating throughout and to ask us questions, and we'll be taking questions primarily at the end, but if there are questions that are kind of sprinkled in throughout the presentation, we might be able to answer them as we're moving along. And if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. And the way to get to the Q&A box is to go to the bottom right of your screen, and there you'll see the three little dots. Just click on those three little dots and you'll see Q&A come up as a possibility. And that's the best way for us to see the questions come in to ask questions as we're moving along throughout the presentation. Now, of course, there's also the chat box, but really do encourage you to use the Q&A box if you can for those questions. It's just easier for us to see and digest and answer from there. As I mentioned, this is already being recorded, so if anyone is trying to furiously take down notes as we get started, feel free to do so, but we will try to have this recording posted on our webpage as soon as we can following this evening's MDA Advocacy Institute, so that you can tune back in, and if you missed anything, got here late, had to leave early, had to step away for a moment, you can watch the recording in just a little while. Okay, I think that's it for housekeeping items. So let me now introduce you to our panel. I'm very pleased to be joined by two really fantastic individuals, quite the leaders within accessible air travel movement. First, we have Kelly Buckland. He's the Disability Policy Advisor within the Office of the Secretary in the Department of Transportation. Kelly, of course, has a long history in advocacy for those with disabilities, and we're so privileged to have Kelly joining us this evening. And he's going to kind of give again the department's vision, its intent, its thoughts behind putting forward this proposed rule. Of course, I'm there in the center of the screen as I lead the public policy team at MDA. And then over on the right is Mindy Henderson. Mindy is our Vice President of Disability Outreach and Empowerment. Mindy is a leader in the disability field, quite the advocate herself, and she's going to be helping us with kind of translating how some of these proposals that are within the department's proposed rule, as well as some of the questions the department is putting forward. Mindy's going to be talking about how she might be answering those questions and some of the experiences that she's had in traveling by air that could inform how she would choose to be participating. So with that, before we get into the rule itself, Kelly, I want to turn it over to you because you, of course, been involved in this process from the start within the Department of Transportation. I want to ask you if you could share what the department is intending, what their vision is, what they're hoping to accomplish with this proposed rule. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Paul. So my name is Kelly Buckland. I'm the Disability Policy Advisor in the Office of the Secretary at the United States Department of Transportation. I was appointed to this position by President Biden in September of 2021. And shortly after I got into this position, we developed what is called the disability policy priorities at the department. So those were then approved by Secretary Pete on the anniversary of the ADA in 2022. And in March of 2022, we had held a public forum to ask people about air travel, especially those in wheelchairs. And so we had about 1,000 people attend that. So this rule really is the culmination of us trying to address the comments that we received at that public forum in March of 22. Before I say the rest of it, I'm an older white guy wearing a cowboy hat. It's my signature, is my hat. And my background is actually Swan Valley, Idaho, which was, this is where my old fishing hole was. But anyway, so with that, I'll talk about specifically what I can tell you about the rule. So while it's out for public comment, DOT employees are pretty limited on what we can say, because if we say something to one group that another group didn't get, then it gives them a leg up. So it kind of interferes with the fairness of the rule deliberations. So what I'm going to tell you about, you guys can get into the substance. What I'm going to tell you about is the process. So, Mark, it was actually 2 weeks ago today that we introduced this proposed rule. So it's just been 2 weeks, and it's out for public comment for 60 days. And I can't tell you exactly when the clock started to tick, because I haven't looked yet, but my guess is it's been ticking for at least a week. So you need to subtract about a week off of the 60-day period. So we're really encouraging people to comment. The secretary did that when we introduced it at the White House. In fact, if you haven't seen it, I would encourage you to go to the White House YouTube channel and pull up the event that we held on the 29th of February. Because he can talk you through the rule as well. Anyway, so it's out there for public comment. We really want people to comment. And I'm going to give you a couple of guidelines around how to comment and make it effective. So first, what I would encourage you to do is, if you're going to comment, tell your personal story. I think people telling the personal stories about their air travel experiences, or flight mirrors, is I guess what they've been started calling them, is really important. And it's really, I think the record that we keep about everybody's stories will be really helpful too later down the road. So encourage you to tell your personal story. I can tell you they count how many comments come in. And so the numbers matter. But if you just do a form letter, everyone who sends the form letter in counts as one comment. So your comments can't all be the same. That's another reason to tell your personal stories, is so that they all differ, because that makes them not the same. So that's another reason to tell your own personal story. And then what happens after that, when the 60-day period closes, the department takes all those comments, they analyze those, they address the rule from the input that we got. They will address the rule and try to make the rule fit with the comments that we received from the public. So again, the process here was March of 22, we held a public forum. We got lots of information from people. We developed this rule this proposed rule as a response to all that input we got in March of 22. Now we're going back out to you guys and saying, hey, this is what we heard. Did we get it right? And if we did get it right, tell us that. If we got it wrong, tell us we need to change stuff, because this is our time to listen to you again and really take in what you're telling us is great, or what needs to be tweaked or changed. So that's really important as well. Then once they do that, they will send it to OMB. OMB has like 90 days to review it, and they send it out to all of the other departments in government and get comments from them as well. So then that's all massaged into a final rule. And our hopes are that we can have a final rule ready in July of this year, like right around the ADA anniversary, and announce a final rule then. That's the hopes. We may or may not make the date, but that's kind of what we're shooting for. So be a great ADA anniversary present to the disability community, I think. So the rule's a big deal, and we really want to hear from you guys about what we got right and what we got wrong. So Mark, with that, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, thanks so much, Kelly. Maybe if I can take a moderator prerogative and ask one question as we go through the proposals within the rule. Those who are attending will see that within the proposal there is not a spot for a wheelchair on airplanes. That's what we're all hoping for. Maybe you could give just a quick update on the department's intent in that direction.
Yeah, happy to. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons I'm at the Department of Transportation is because I wanted to work on that, right? I was involved when the feasibility study was being done by the Access Board and the Transportation Research Board. And in fact, I testified at least a couple of times in front of the panel that was doing, and basically my comment was, of course it's feasible. The question really is whether you have the will to do it. That's really what this is about, is having the will, not the ability, because the ability is obvious to me. But what we did at the department, and this is sort of because of how FAA prioritizes safety, right? So you wouldn't know that from all the Boeing planes falling out of the sky and stuff, but we're hoping to change that too. But there really are, I want to be looking at the safety of it. So they've developed a 3-year research plan that hopefully will then lead to another rulemaking. So the first year was 2023, and they studied crash testing of wheelchairs. And if you know what a WC-19 wheelchair is, it's one that has already been crash tested, and can withstand up to 19 G-forces, which is well beyond what you need to have it do in an airplane. So most wheelchairs are WC-19. The one I'm in is a WC-19, just happenstance, because they kind of have adopted that standard in the wheelchair industry for people traveling on buses or metros or all those things. They want a chair that's durable enough to withstand like a crash. So same for the airplanes. Now, there were some things that came back that the WC-19 chair didn't perform like we had hoped it would. So there's going to have to be a couple of workarounds. But what we're trying to do is avoid people having to buy a special chair to fly in. So we did do that. So most wheelchairs are WC-19. They should work on an airplane. So that piece is completed. The second piece is to now study and crash test securement systems. Most of the time that's like belts that tie you down into the floor. It could also be though like a quick release or a Q-strength system where there's a device mounted to your chair you can pull in to lock up. That's the part we're going to be studying this coming year. And then the third and final piece is actually studying how to best secure people in their wheelchairs. So if there's a crash, they don't fly out of their chair because everybody else wears a seatbelt. So we're gonna have to figure out how to restrain people in their chairs as well and make the oxygen masks when they drop down and work, all that stuff. And so that's going to be the third and final piece. And then, like I say, once that's done, then we should be able to work toward a rule. So it will take probably some time to put together the technical standards that would have to go into the rule, but not beyond another year, I don't think. So I'm projecting like 26, we could have a rule. But I could be wrong about that, but that's where we're headed. So that was one of the reasons I came to the department, is because I wanted to work on getting wheelchair spots on airplanes like they are in every other form of travel. So I'm excited to see where this is going. I think it will happen in my lifetime. So I'm very encouraged by that. I'll probably start flying a lot more once that happens. But anyway, we are not we're not kicking back and not working on that because we're doing this. FAA is going full blast on that. So we're really working on it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kelly. I can tell you that if I hadn't asked you that and we hadn't addressed it here at the outset, every single person here would have probably been asking that question. Well, what about wheelchair spots in airplanes? But you answered that fantastically. There still are a handful of technical feasibility studies still needing to be completed, especially with the restraints. But hearing that maybe we're just a couple years away from that rule that will require eventually for airlines to have that spot on airplanes is, at least to me, very encouraging. So I appreciate that update. I'm sure everyone appreciates that update as well. So with that, Kelly, again, thank you again for the time this evening. I know you've had a long week and you were traveling today as it was. So we can wish you the best evening ahead for yourself there. And again, thank you again for joining us on our MDA Advocacy Institute this evening.
Yep. Again, thanks for having me. Have a great night, everybody. Good luck in your advocacy. Thanks for what you do.
All right. Thank you very much, Kelly. So before we get into the specifics of the proposed rule, just a word on what this effort is versus what we've also been talking about that's happening up on Capitol Hill. I know many of you may have attended our Advocacy Institute last month, where we covered what's happening on Capitol Hill with the FAA reauthorization. And for a little bit of background, that's the effort that happens every 5 years or so, in which Congress really tries to just take a close look at everything pertaining to commercial air travel. Really anything that's in the sky that isn't military based is governed by this FAA reauthorization. And that includes all the accessibility provisions and ways that we can make air travel more accessible and safe and dignified for those with disabilities. So that process is actually still going on Capitol Hill right now. They've been actually past their deadline to try to pass this big bill. They keep negotiating over a number of different provisions. That the House has one version, the Senate has another version, so they're trying to merge their bills. And as of today, the deadline for them to do so is May 10th. So we're just a little under 2 months away from when the Congress is set to finish their policy making. Now, what this proposed rule is actually implementing some of the work that Congress has already done. Congress passes the laws, the administration implements them. So Congress is trying to pass some new laws under the FAA reauthorization. And again, you can go back to our Advocacy Institute from February to really get a crash course on everything that Congress is working on there. But as Congress is trying to do their stuff over there, the administration in this proposed rule, with the authorities that they already have, that Congress has already given them, are trying to make air travel safer and more dignified for those with disabilities. So I just wanted to just do about 60 seconds background, because these are parallel tracks of initiatives happening right now, trying to make air travel more accessible, both incredibly important, both needing your voice, both hoping that come in May or so, or maybe a little ways thereafter, if this proposed rule is finalized in July, as Kelly had just said they're hoping to do, that would also be very fantastic. So with that as a little bit of a preamble, why don't we actually get into what this proposed rule is doing? This is, of course, what we're here to be talking about tonight. And just as a reminder, please put questions in the chat, or I'm sorry, in the Q&A box. Rama, I see you already put a question in there. I'll be covering that question as we move along with the presentation. And then if you're commenting in the chat, please, if you have a question, put it into the Q&A box. But of course, for chatting with each other, continue to use the chat, and that's what it's there for. And thank you to Mark and Jory for putting some links in the chat that we've referenced, including the White House event that Kelly referenced earlier that was 2 weeks ago. The YouTube link is in the chat for you to check out there. And then Mark just put last month's webinar on the FAA reauthorization, the YouTube link to that as well. So if you want a double feature tonight, you can join us live for this one, and then once we hit 8 o'clock Eastern or so, you can watch last month's on FAA reauthorization if you hadn't already seen it. Okay, so what's in the proposed rule and what impact might it have? And as I'm going along through each of these sections, again, Mindy's going to be giving her perspectives on the ways that DOT is approaching this, and more specifically, her experiences that she has had and how she would want, how she would be telling DOT, the Department of Transportation. I'll be using those interchangeably. What she would be emphasizing to the department if she was to be commenting on this proposal. And I'll ask that you all be thinking about your answers as well, because at the end of our walkthrough of the proposed rule, we're going to be giving you 2 opportunities to get more involved. One will include sharing your story with us so that we can craft a comment that is best representative of the community. And then the other is sharing your story directly to the Department of Transportation, just as Kelly Buckland was suggesting that you do. We'll have opportunities for you to be doing both of those as we move along here. So let's get started. So the first thing that the department covers within their proposed rule pertains to safe and dignified. Safe and dignified are the keywords here, because what they want to do is, one, reemphasize that air travel must be safe and dignified for wheelchair users. And then from there, they actually ask a handful of questions of, well, what does that actually mean? For example, are the terms safe and dignified well understood by both air carriers, so the airlines, as well as the public? Should there be specific definitions tied to what safe is and what dignified is? And should the department consider actually putting those in regulation? And then are there any specific practices or procedures the department should require to ensure that safety is maintained and dignity is safeguarded? So as the department is considering these things, we're going to be writing into the department of what we think safe and dignified means. So Mindy, as a wheelchair user and as someone who has faced off in air travel yourself for that matter, maybe give a few words on, if you were thinking about answering some of these questions, what safe and dignified would mean to you.
Thanks, Paul. So, yes, first of all, I'll just throw out there that, as Paul mentioned at the onset, I'm an advocate. I'm a wheelchair user myself, and primarily because of the safety and loss of dignity involved in air travel, I actually did not travel by airplane for 14 years. I got back on an airplane last May to go to MDA's Hill Day, which was probably the only reason I would have gotten back on an airplane, and have actually continued to fly since then. I've flown about 7 or 8 more times and have learned a lot about the process and have seen a lot. And so in terms of this, that's probably something that I would share in my commenting, is that these were big deterrents to me in flying for 14 years. The risk, the safety issues, and the loss of my own dignity, and the loss of humanity in flying by air kept me off of an airplane. So this is a really big deal. And a couple of things that I would ask them to consider would be, a lot of it has to do with training. And I've actually, without going into a lot of detail, I've actually seen sort of a before and after example of what really effective training can do and the impact that it can have on the safety and the overall experience, the quality of the experience for people with disabilities traveling by air. More specifically, I would talk about, ensuring that people who are lifting, helping with those seat transfers, meet the physical criteria of doing that job. I've almost been dropped because there were issues with the person that was doing that job. Not that they weren't well intentioned, but they were not well equipped to do the job themselves. And so things like that. I would also ask them to consider not only training the ground crew and individuals that are conducting those seat transfers, but also flight attendants, because flight attendants, as a lot of you may know, are can be pivotal in a lot of the communication and the information that we're getting. And I've had flight attendants who would only speak to my caregiver. And so that's another thing that I would probably call out in my comments. And then the last thing that I'll go ahead and just mention here quickly is connecting flights. I think that we can all relate to the loss of dignity that's experienced with these seat transfers and the aisle chairs and going up and down the aisle of an airplane. But if you are getting onto a connecting flight where the plane is not empty, there may already be 100 people on that flight. There's an element of embarrassment to that as well. And so that's probably something that I would call out in my comments, Paul.
Thank you, Mindy. Yeah, all personal experiences that would inform your message that you would send to DOT and then can inform MDA as we're constructing our extensive comment that we're going to be sending into the department. So thank you for those experiences that you're sharing today, Mindy, to help those who are attending tonight start thinking about the things that they would want to also be saying. And I already see some of those experiences in the chat, for that matter, Julianne and Melinda and other folks sharing experiences that they've had. Those are the exact kind of things that the department needs to be hearing to further justify them moving forward with this proposed rule. Okay, so moving on to prompt enplaning, deplaning, and connecting assistance. And let me actually use this opportunity to answer a question I've seen a couple times, both in the chat as well as in the Q&A. So the Department of Transportation has jurisdiction over any commercial air travel within the U.S. airspace. And so that means, of course, any travel that's happening from one U.S. city to another. But that also means any international travel that's departing from the United States or entering the United States. So questions about, does this apply to U.S. and international travel? So certainly U.S., but international to the extent that the flight either starts or ends in the United States. Now, if it's a Air France flight that goes from Paris to Lyon or something of that nature, U.S. Department of Transportation does not have jurisdiction in that area. So that would be under French law, of course, as an example. But if there is a flight that's entering or leaving the United States and it's international, those flights would have to comply with these proposals. Okay, and that includes pertaining to prompt enplaning, deplaning, and connecting assistance. So what the Department of Transportation is proposing to do under this provision is to ensure that prompt assistance is offered to those with disabilities as they get onto the plane, as they leave the plane, and as they're moving about in the terminal. And what they're trying to do is better define what prompt assistance actually means. And what the standard that they're proposing here is that prompt assistance means that assistance is ready when the last passenger who is otherwise not requiring assistance has either departed the plane or has entered the plane. So hopefully this means that we will no longer have the situation in which folks with disabilities might be sitting on the plane for half an hour or longer for that matter, waiting for somebody to come assist them off the plane or waiting at the gate for somebody to help assist them onto the plane for that matter. Now that is what the department is proposing, but at the same time, the department also is asking some questions, such as, should the department be thinking about what the airline industry likes to say, the totality of circumstances? That's a term the airline industry loves to use, because that's the way that they say, well, it wasn't really our fault. If you take into effect that it was raining outside, that delayed people, so, not our fault, totality of circumstances. DOT is asking, should we really be considering the quote-unquote totality of circumstances as we're determining what is prompt and what is not prompt? In addition to that, should promptly continue to mean when there's no longer any other passengers to deplane or board the plane? Or is there some other standard that the department should be considering as is considering what does prompt actually mean. So Mindy, I know you have some experiences in this area as well. Would you like to share any that you'd want to contribute pertaining to prompt and planing, deep planing, or connecting assistance?
Yeah, just a couple of examples. I've experienced both ends of the spectrum. I've experienced really quick planing, deplaning, and end planing, and I've experienced really the other end of the spectrum, very, very slow, painful deplaning in particular. And so the experiences that I would share are, in terms of good experiences, I've seen my wheelchair be brought up to the gate and ready for me when that last person steps off of the airplane. And so, that was my sort of proof of concept that it's possible. Again, to your point, Paul, the totality of circumstances, it's hard to say that would be possible all the time, but I think that could be the gold standard potentially. And in terms of my emotional state, the time that happened, I felt prioritized. Not having to sit and wait for another 20 minutes on the airplane waiting for my wheelchair to come up. The other thing that I would mention is that most recently I had an experience where my wheelchair was actually tagged to come up to the gate, but it was sent to baggage claim. And so I'm not sure what the disconnect there was, but that was an example where we probably delayed the next flight by 45 minutes because my wheelchair then had to go from baggage claim all the way back through TSA again and up to me. And so it was a very long process and delay that a lot of people were affected by. I think those are a couple of personal notes that I would share to sort of underscore this piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, thank you, Mindy. Unfortunate circumstances, certainly, but experiences that can inform the department as it's looking to finalize as strong a proposal as possible. And as someone who's experienced these kinds of circumstances, and many of course, joining us as well, important experiences to emphasize. And I also see some comments coming into the chat, some experiences that folks have had with children with disabilities, and really, again, these are important to share here, but important to share with the department as well, so that they can hear loudly and clearly from our community about really addressing and fixing these issues. Okay, so moving on from prompt and planing, deep planing, and connecting assistance, we move over to mishandling of wheelchairs and assistive devices. So, and what the Department of Transportation is trying to do within this provision is to try to close any of the loopholes, frankly, that the airline industry has when they are able to get off the hook on a damaged wheelchair. And they can do this in ways in which they say, well, we didn't mishandle the wheelchair because we found this loophole within the definition that shows that it wasn't our fault that it came back broken. It wasn't our fault that it was delayed. And so what the Department of Transportation is doing is just more specifically defining what constitutes a violation of the Air Carrier Access Act. And that's the 1986 law that is the foundation for any of the accessibility provisions that even are in place. And I know that they're limited, I know, but there's still something there that counts in that law as violations of people's rights. And so what they're trying to do here again is that trying to tighten up that definition, as well as require airlines to immediately notify folks about their right to file a claim with the airline for a damaged or mishandled wheelchair or other assistive device. And then from there to be able to choose a preferred vendor for repairs as well, which actually we'll get back to here momentarily. So what the DOT, in addition to proposing what they're proposing, they're also asking a couple of questions. So for one, is the definition of mishandled extensive enough? And what they're saying is that mishandled means anything that's damaged, that's delayed, that's lost, and what's stolen. Actually, before they hadn't mentioned stolen wheelchairs, and evidently this can happen. Now they're saying if the wheelchair is stolen, that's still on the airline to have to address for that matter. What are airlines currently telling passengers when their devices are mishandled? Are they telling passengers enough, or are they not telling them enough? What are airlines doing right now, if anything, to tell folks about the handling of their wheelchairs? Are the should the proposal this proposal to notify passengers that their rights also include other assistive devices for that matter. So this is one of the things that the department is putting forward as just trying to close those loopholes, trying to make airlines more responsible for the mishandling of wheelchairs that they obviously still do far too often. Mindy, as you're looking at some of these things that the department is asking, any thoughts that you have that you'd want to offer?
Yeah, I think that in this case, and looking through this section, one of my first questions that came to mind is when does that 24-hour clock start ticking? And that could be very, very important in terms of getting us loaner chairs and things like that when things go awry. But then my additional thoughts were, maybe some of the additional rigor that the DOT could consider around the process of loaner chairs and things when that comes up. Specifically, I think again, probably a lot of us know that a lot of our chairs are very, very customized, and they have, therapeutic supports and a lot of things that are really important to us in our physical health. And so, one of the things that I personally might suggest is that a um, a fitting session be a requirement when a loaner chair has to be given to us, just to make sure that it's truly comparable in terms of the physicality that we need. I might also ask them to think about compensation for wheelchair users for missed days of work because of an incomparable chair potentially, or the time that it would take to get a chair that would allow us to resume our work duties.
Yeah, thank you, Mindy. All very important things to emphasize there. I appreciate that. I just want to address two things before we move on. There have been a couple raised hands. I appreciate folks raising their hands, wanting to participate. And we're really just taking at this point comments either through the chat or if you have a question through the Q&A. Really appreciate all the engagement for that matter, though. And I've seen a couple folks also ask about the wheelchair spots on airplanes. Again, that's the thing that everybody wants. They want to be able to take the wheelchair onto the plane, then take it right off, and that's the direction that we're trying to go in. But to mention once again within this proposed rule specifically, the Department of Transportation is not including that within this proposed rule. Kelly Buckland, our guest at the outset, said that, and he was at the Department of Transportation. He said that they're moving forward with that. They have a very comprehensive research plan of the technical feasibility studies that still need to be completed before they can mandate a wheelchair spot on an airplane, but they are moving as conservatively through that as they can, and they're hopeful in the next handful of years that rule will be issued by the administration to require wheelchair spots on airplanes. But as of today, and as of this proposed rule, that is still not the case, unfortunately. That still folks have to transfer out of their wheelchair to enter the plane, and then of course off the plane back into their wheelchair from there. Okay, let's move forward to the next provision, and this is timely passenger notifications and return of delayed wheelchairs. And what the DOT is doing here, and again, they're using the word prompt, and that's the prompt return of a delayed wheelchair. And that is a proposal to require airlines to transport any delayed wheelchair to the passenger's final destination within 24 hours of their arrival by whatever means necessary. So that essentially is what they're proposing, that airlines have to get you your wheelchair within 24 hours if it missed a connecting flight, if there are other reasons for why it was delayed. Now, there are other things DOT is asking, such as should DOT consider requiring status updates to passengers about their checked wheelchairs and scooters? What are airlines' current policies about and practices when a wheelchair scooter does not fit into the cargo compartment? Are they telling anybody that it doesn't fit? Are they, coming onto the plane and telling you this? Are they just letting you fly off and your wheelchair is still left on the jetway for that matter? And then actually they ask a lot of questions on this. They're also asking about what are airlines doing right now about returning delayed wheelchairs to folks? How quickly are they getting? What are the associated costs for doing so? What communication that they're providing to wheelchair users in returning wheelchairs. And then this last one here, I think, is particularly important. What potential additional costs might wheelchair users have while they're left without their personalized wheelchair. Mindy, you already kind of mentioned a little bit towards that last point, but are there other things that you'd want to point out that you'd want DOT to know about as you're considering the situation?
Yeah, I think that I again, I would probably start by sharing my own personal experience and just how important my wheelchair is to me and my life and my independence, what the impacts are to being without my wheelchair, the fact that it's our legs. And allows me to do my job, to live a normal life, so many different things. And so I think that underscoring the impacts of not being of being without our wheelchair is going to be really important. And then to follow up on that, communication, in my opinion, would be critically important. Being able to get in touch with somebody at any given moment to find out the status of a wheelchair repair or delivery, whether it's the airline or maybe the DME vendor who's working on it. That would be very, very important. Um, yeah, I think I'll pause there, Paul.
Thank you, Mindy. Yeah, absolutely. Certainly good points to reiterate. All right, let's move forward. I see a couple other good questions in the Q&A. We're actually going to get to those as we move along here. So some teasing of some future provisions here. So prompt repair or replacement of a damaged wheelchair. What the department is proposing to do is proposing that passengers be provided two options to repair or replace their wheelchair if it's handled by airlines. Certain airlines only give folks one option, and that's that you're going to work within our system and you're going to like it, essentially. And that is still one of the options that carriers themselves handle the repair and replacement of the wheelchair with an equivalent or greater function and safety within a reasonable time frame, and then pay all the costs of doing so. But the second option here perhaps could be the most different or beneficial compared to our current process, which is that the airlines allow the passengers to arrange all of this themselves. That includes the repair replacement of the wheelchair, and then that the airline from there has to, of course, cover all of those costs. So it opens up this additional option that some airlines already might have, but a lot of other airlines do not. So this would require that airlines allow for individuals to be able to go through their own process to repair or replace their wheelchair. Mindy, I know this is something that you may have experienced yourself or you're familiar with at the very least. Is this something that, well, actually, let me move forward to the questions. I think I didn't get to the questions here. Yes, before I turn to you, Mindy. DOT is also asking, while also proposing these two options being available, are there sufficient vendors to actually repair and replace wheelchairs and scooters? I think we actually all unfortunately know that the answer is no, but they're wanting to get more details on that. What's the average turnaround time for a vendor to actually repair a wheelchair once a repair request has been made? Are there disputes between passengers and airlines about how that repair is going to happen? I think we know the answer to that is yes, but give us some examples of times in which the airline has said, well, we're going to repair your wheelchair in this way, and you may have said, absolutely not. That's not the way in which the wheelchair actually needs to function or be repaired. Are there stricter timelines the department can operate under? Should individuals be able to test their wheelchairs upon it being returned to actually make sure that the repair is what the repair needs to be needs to be conducted? And then from there, our friends at the Paralyzed Veterans of America are also proposing that should there be an immediate minor repair option? So once you land at the destination and maybe something minor is off with the wheelchair, not catastrophic, something that could be fixed relatively quickly, the airlines actually have a repair personnel at the airport to repair your wheelchair there live so that you can then head off to your next steps from there. So Mindy, now I'll turn it over to you for thoughts on any of these questions the department is asking.
Yeah, what apart from some of the things that I've already mentioned, I think the other thing that comes to, well, two things that come to mind here is, you know, prompt is a bit nebulous, and so I would request that the DOT better define that, of course. And then again, I think in this case, reiterating what the impacts are to being without our wheelchairs And then lastly, there's also a bit of an issue in the DME industry right now where repairs and things are actually taking quite a long time. I know that there are a number of reasons why that is, but that's another thing that I think should be considered by the DOT is that there are delays in the DME industry in and of itself that could impact our abilities to get these repairs and replacements and things done in a prompt way, and that should probably be factored in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. A number of great questions and comments coming in through the chat. Thank you, everybody, for the stories you're sharing, for the examples of what we're talking about that you've experienced yourself. A number of good questions in the Q&A as well. So really appreciate all of that. And Shelley, I appreciate the comment that you put within the Q&A about the importance of having hydraulic lifts available, as if they are not available at airports, then the wheelchair has to go through quite the circuitous route to get onto the plane, and that can certainly cause delays and certainly leads to things not being prompt at all. So that's important for the department to be aware of. So thank you for that comment, Shelley. Okay, loaner wheelchair accommodations. The department is proposing that airlines need to provide loaner wheelchairs to those with disabilities while waiting for repairs or replacement of the mishandled wheelchair, and that the airline needs to consult with the passenger receiving the loaner to ensure that it fits their needs as much as possible. So what the department is also asking while putting forward this requirement or proposing this requirement is what types of certain customizations are reasonable to expect on a loaner wheelchair. There's obviously lots of customizations folks have with their power wheelchairs. Some might be reasonable to expect in a loaner. Some might be so specialized that in the context of a loaner wheelchair, it might not be reasonable to expect all loaner wheelchairs, or at least some of them, to have that customization. And then in addition to that, what additional potential costs might individuals incur while using a loaner wheelchair that airlines need to consider or the airline should cover? So Mindy, on loaner wheelchairs, is there any thoughts that you would have to offer to the Department of Transportation?
Um, I think that a lot of what I've already mentioned probably applies to this. I think that where I might add some additional color is around the types of customizations that are required versus not. And so in my case, what I might do is, I would probably talk about my own wheelchair and the customizations that have been made for me and what the potential medical impacts to me would be. Should I be without this chair? I think we've all heard stories about hospitalizations and long-term injuries and things that have occurred as a result of not having our own chair with our own customizations. And I would probably look very closely at my own chair and think of the impacts and what sorts of injuries and more serious things could occur as a result of not having certain customizations, and encourage the DOT to think through where that line is, where they would draw that line between required and not.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mindy. Okay, perhaps one of the most important parts of the proposed rule, and this is something that I've seen folks mention about lack of training or lack of trained individuals. So what the department is proposing to do is annual training, including hands-on training, of airline employees, contractors, and anybody involved, frankly, in assisting passengers and in seat transfers, or in handling passengers' wheelchairs. So really any time in which individual interacts with those with disabilities, that they are trained in how best they should be interacting with our community. So the DOT has a couple questions in addition to proposing this annual hands-on training for everybody involved with the process. And that includes specific training requirements that they should mandate that airlines actually implement with their employees, what topics should be covered, how to define hands-on, is an annual training adequate, should it be more often than that, and things of that nature. So Mindy, as we're thinking about how best to train airline employees, whether they be those assisting with transfers, those loading wheelchairs onto planes, or really anything in between, what's something that you'd want to emphasize?
Yeah, and again, these do kind of build upon each other, and so I've already mentioned a few things around training and some of the thoughts that I have here. But in addition, I would mention the again, I think the experience that I've had where I've seen training really work well, and I would go into some detail on that, and what I've personally seen is that communication is a lot of it. I think that we could probably all agree that there's no one way to conduct a seat transfer with the variability between different people and sensitive areas and things like that. So what I've seen work really well is when the airline staff comes to me and asks me, what do I need? Instead of trying to be prescriptive with me about how the seat transfer is going to happen, they've asked me how it should happen. And those have been the most successful seat transfers that I have seen. I just had another thought, but yeah, I think that that's the other thing that I would add here, Paul. That's probably my biggest thought. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought of what it is. Also having, and I've heard a few other people in the arena say this. I think that I would also recommend having people with disabilities involved in the development of the training. I think that without that perspective, it's a lot of people trying to conjecture about what the right ways to handle these things are. And I think you need a really good cross representation from people with different disabilities weighing in on what the best way to train people would be.
Yeah, well said. That's absolutely something we'll be emphasizing. And any personal stories of how that experience in lack of training have gone, that's the kind of stuff the Department of Transportation needs to hear. So just to answer a couple questions right now within the Q&A, for those wanting access to the slides, if you email us at advocacy@mdausa.org, we can follow you up with the slides thereafter. But again, we're going to be posting the full recording of this in a little bit as quickly as we can. So you can not only see the slides, but hear us talking along with them. And if you don't want to hear that part, you can always just mute us while watching the YouTube video. So either way, you'll get the slides. All right, just a handful more things to go through because I know we're actually, for those watching the clock, we're just a few minutes before the hour. So we're going to speed through these last couple, but there was a question about onboard wheelchairs, and this proposed rule would strengthen the requirements of not only the presence of onboard wheelchairs, but then also, the requirements pertaining to the mobility, the height, the turning ability, the cushion, the headrest, all the features of the onboard wheelchair as well. But the department wants to know what other features are important to ensure that onboard wheelchairs have for those with disabilities. The department also was proposing to align accessible lavatories in twin aisle aircraft. So those are the big ones. Those are the ones that oftentimes fly internationally, with the proposal that they had over the summer for single aisle airplanes. The accessibility of lavatories for single aisle airplanes actually went beyond what twin aisle airplanes have in the proposed rule this summer. So what this is doing is basically just catching twin aisle airplanes up with single aisle airplanes for that matter. And then finally, the last thing that the proposed rule does is actually require reimbursement of airfare difference. And this is specific to when folks with disabilities buy a ticket on one plane or one flight, but then realize that the plane that's being used, the cargo hold, the cargo door is not large enough to fit their wheelchair in. And so they have to then get another ticket, or they just have to avoid that first flight altogether. And then that can be a tax on wheelchair users having to pay more for a flight that happens to have a larger cargo door. So DOT is asking, how often does this happen? And are there other things that airlines are doing or not doing, for that matter, that could assist with this? So Mindy, last comment over to you for that matter. Thoughts on what you'd want to emphasize to the department on this?
Yeah, just really quickly, my own personal circumstance is that because, like we've said, we're all waiting for wheelchair spots on airplanes. And until that happens, I do need to travel with a caregiver. And so I would hope that this reimbursement of airfare difference would also extend to that caregiver's ticket. So I think that that's the biggest thing that in my own personal experience, I would be bringing up here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mindy. That's a great point to make, and we'll want to emphasize that within our comments as well. Okay, so there you have it. That's what the department is proposing to do. There was a comment about how this is demonstrably different than what the Air Carrier Access Act is already requiring. Now, these, of course, are the implementing regulations of what the Air Carrier Access Act is. So it has to fit within the frame of the Air Carrier Access Act. But what the department is trying to do is really try to cross all T's and dot all I's of what they're able to do within the Air Carrier Access Act to make air travel more accessible. So with that, just a few words on what's next, because we already teased to you how you all can get involved, and you already are. Everyone who's putting comments in the chats, comments in the Q&A box, sharing your stories, we love to hear those stories, because then we can feed those into our comments that then go to the Department of Transportation. And it was Kelly who said that meeting back in March of 2022, in which a lot of the community gathered to tell the department all the ways in which air travel needs to be made more accessible. It was hearing those stories that led them to actually issuing this proposed rule the last 2 weeks. So the first thing that you can do for us is to share your story, not only just within the chat and the Q&A, but we're actually also going to be putting a link here in the chat in any moment now with a link to share your story on these kind of 4 main areas. The first is what safe and dignified means to you. The second is about the prompt standard. What does prompt assistance mean to you? The third would be when the Department of Transportation is actually issuing these additional training requirements, how would you want to see airline personnel be trained? What are the things that you'd want to be sure those who are interacting with you at the airport or on the plane, that they're trained on, that they're knowledgeable on? And then finally, and this is a big question, but this is an important question to emphasize, how has a damaged or delayed wheelchair impacted your health and well-being? Both, of course, within the context of your physical mental health, but also in the context of just the missed opportunities or other missed experiences, missed opportunities for employment, a missed wedding, a missed whatever it happens to be, because your air travel was impeded because of a lost or damaged or otherwise mishandled wheelchair. So please answer these questions for us, because we're going to put all of this into our comment document that's going to go to the Department of Transportation, and so that they have your viewpoints. But, and thank you, Mark, for putting the voter voice link in the chat. Anyone who hasn't seen it yet, there it is. Click on that link, and that will take you to the page that you see on the right side of your screen right there. But the other thing to emphasize is that we're going to give you the opportunity today to file your own comments with the Department of Transportation. They're going to go directly from your fingers and your keyboard to the department, just as Kelly Buckland at the outset of our meeting was encouraging you to do so. And here again, we really encourage you to customize. We do have language already put within the message text box, and that's really just to get you started. You can take some of that as inspiration. You can take half of it. You can take 90% of it. You can take 0% of it. But it's there just to get you inspired for some ideas for communicating with the Department of Transportation. But again, the things to really emphasize to the department are how improvement of the training of airline personnel would be important to you, and how improving that training, what that really means to you or to a loved one who's flying with a disability. In addition to that, improving the training of those who are actually handling the wheelchairs and stowing the wheelchairs in the cargo holds, what that means to you, how that would be important. And of course, please share your experiences of broken and damaged wheelchairs, and how any way we can avoid broken and damaged wheelchairs, or if they happen to be broken and damaged, the ways the department is trying to mitigate the impact of that by having quicker, more accessible repairs and replacements, by having loaner wheelchairs be better, all the ways in which trying to minimize the damage and the really challenging experience folks can have in a broken and damaged wheelchair. That's something that is minimized and mitigated as much as possible. So again, the link that was put in the chat by Mark, I believe here just a moment ago, that's the link to send your own comments directly to the Department of Transportation. And as you heard, Kelly Buckland at the department at the outset of our meeting encouraged that. So I know as I conclude that sentence, we are already 1 minute past the hour. We had a lot to cover today, and we really appreciate everyone sticking with us this evening or afternoon. to cover this very dense topic. I'm happy to stick around for a few more minutes to answer a few of the questions that have come in through both the Q&A and the chat. I know there's a couple I didn't have a chance to get to, but if you have any further questions that if you have to hop off yourself, email us at advocacy@mdausa.org. You can also join us by visiting mda.org/advocacy for this opportunity, but all the other opportunities that we have for you. Text us at MDA-USA to 50457 to be able to sign up for our advocacy alerts. Trust me, we'll be alerting you many times over the next little while for your opportunities to get more involved in this issue and any other issue that we're tackling for the neuromuscular disease community. But with that, I'm going to turn back to the Q&A box and see there's a few that I can answer here. Julianne, you asked, will TSA be included in this proposal? The answer is by and large no, and that's because TSA is governed. This proposal was governing what the airlines do or who the airlines contract with. And TSA consequently doesn't necessarily fit within the scope of the proposal. Now that's the bad news, if you will. The good news is that actually MDA has forged a partnership with the Transportation Security Administration in which we're communicating with TSA on how TSA needs to be improving its practices. And so if there are experiences, Julianne, that you've had with TSA that you never want to experience again, that you want to see reformed, tell us about them. Email us at advocacy@mdausa.org, and we'll try to get those to TSA. Mindy actually herself has had experiences with TSA that weren't so great, but Mindy, you actually had the chance to talk with TSA about them, and hopefully that's actually working to reform the system a bit. So TSA is listening, and they've been listening to us on this. So Julianne, please communicate with us about if there is anything that you'd like to see TSA doing differently. We can see if we can encourage TSA to be doing so. Julianne, I see you have another comment here. Please add or assistive mobile device to the language where you use wheelchair. Absolutely. Or mobile assistance, assistive mobile device will be throughout our comments, will be throughout hopefully the comments that you all are submitting. It's not just wheelchairs, it's all mobile assistive mobility devices. It's important to be emphasizing throughout this. So I really appreciate that point that you're making there, Julianne, as well. Okay, I think we got to most of the questions in the Q&A about international and domestic flights, about wheelchair spots on airplanes, about prompt assistance and so forth. So I'm just going to kind of scroll through, see if there's anything else that's jumping out that's really needs to be answered tonight. I think we got through a lot of them. I really, again, appreciate all the comments people have been posting. Those comments can be will be submitted, will be inspiring us as we're submitting our comments to DOT. And again, please fill out the comment form that we're offering everybody to share your experiences with us. And then also please, of course, be contacting the Department of Transportation yourself as well within the link within the chat. So with that, I think I might call it an evening. I know that there are a lot of really fantastic comments in the chat. Thank you all again for such an engaging evening with us. I'll just say it one more time. I said it, I think, 5 times now in the last 5 minutes. But please use those 2 opportunities that we're giving you. Let us know about your experiences so that our comments are as informed as possible. But then use your own voice in contacting the Department of Transportation by filling out the template comments that we're handing to you, and please personalize it. As Kelly said at the outset, those personalized comments are the ones that are loud and clear to the Department of Transportation, more so than any form comment perhaps that's coming in. So I think I'll close the evening there. Thanks all again for joining us for our Advocacy Institute this evening. Please reach out to us, reach out to the department, and continue joining us in this effort to make air travel more accessible. Thanks all.